My name is James William. What matters is the story, the truth buried under years of silence, fear, and the kind of pain only a child can understand. This is the story of how I grew up under the shadow of the one person who should have loved me more than anyone, but instead became the greatest villain in my life, the architect of my darkest memories, the destroyer of everything I once held dear. Some people grow up wishing they could make their parents proud. I grew up wishing mine had never existed. I was only 2 years old when my baby brother Mark was born. At that age, the world is small, blurry, confusing. I didn't understand that babies arrive and the universe shifts around them. I only understood that suddenly there was less space for me, fewer arms reaching for me, fewer smiles directed at me. Like many toddlers, jealousy became my language and acting out became my habit. But I wasn't hopeless. I wasn't the monster my mother liked to call me. My grandparents, God bless their tired but loving hearts, took me under their wings. They taught me softness when the world gave me cruelty, patience when my mother gave me anger, compassion when she gave me indifference. They taught me what it meant to protect someone smaller, to guide them, to love them. Being a big brother wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. And slowly, I grew into that role, shedding the childish tantrums and finding joy in helping my little brother smile. But none of that mattered to my mother. From the moment Mark entered the world, she treated me like a stain on her life, an inconvenience, a mistake. She didn't hide it. She called me a demonic hell spawn, a label she used so casually you'd think she was talking about a faulty toaster instead of her firstborn son. While she kept Mark close, cherished him, held him, adored him, she'd push me farther and farther away. I became the child she sent to my grandparents, house-like luggage she didn't want to unpack. I became the ghost walking through her life, barely acknowledged unless she needed someone to blame. To her, I wasn't her firstborn. I wasn't her child. I was simply old news, the draft she wanted to throw out so she could start fresh with a new, improved family. And as the years passed, her coldness ripened into something much darker. When she remarried and had more children, Sam and Alicia, the divide grew sharper. She had a new family now, a fresh set of kids to dote on. She had no space for me except as a target for her frustration or the punching bag for her husband's cruelty. My stepfather believed that children didn't need guidance or affection. They needed fear. He believed pain was the most effective language, and he made sure I learned it fluently. Anytime I questioned something, anytime I showed a hint of individuality, anytime I dared to think for myself, he beat me. He didn't wait until we were alone. Sometimes he hit me right in front of my mother, and she would sit there, indifferent, as if watching someone swat a fly off the wall. That was when the seed of revenge took root, a quiet, simmering ember of hatred that I was too young and too damaged to understand. My mind, already bruised from years of emotional neglect, became foggy and fractured after a bookcase full of hardbacks fell on me when I was 11. The damage was never treated properly, just like everything else in that house. By 13, I had no idea what kind of revenge I wanted or how I'd ever achieve it. All I knew was that I would not forget what they did. I would not forget how they treated me. I would not forget how it felt to be a child begging for love only to be given violence. And I would make them pay for it someday. But I waited. And as I waited, things only got worse. My mother and stepfather refused to do any housework. Not a single dish, not a single load of laundry. The house was a disaster unless my grandparents came over, and that was the signal for work to begin, not by the adults but by us children. Every weekend when my grandparents drove out of town, my mother transformed the house into a labor camp. Chores would have been fine. Every kid should help around the house. But she went far beyond chores. She sent me up onto the roof to clean gutters. She forced me to climb trees, to chop branches with tools far too heavy for my small hands. She treated me like a replaceable worker instead of her son. And when I hesitated or expressed fear, my stepfather's belt became the only motivation I needed. Then came the day that permanently shattered what was left of our family. I was 14. Alicia was 2. My mom told Mark and me to watch her while she slept with baby Sam. My stepfather was playing video games in the living room. He let us watch sometimes, but only if we stayed quiet and behaved perfectly. Otherwise, we risked another violent outburst. Everything seemed fine until a sudden, chilling thought hit me. Where was Alicia? Mark and I scrambled through the house, frantic. We checked rooms, closets, the backyard, but didn't think to look at the pool. We were kids, just kids. Children who were given a responsibility far too big and far too dangerous. And then we heard the scream. My mother screamed shrill, piercing, primal. We ran outside and found her kneeling beside Alicia's tiny, limp body on the deck. She wasn't breathing. My mother and stepfather tried CPR, their hands shaking, their voices breaking. My father, who happened to be visiting, burned his hand on the stove when he heard the chaos and rushed outside. He dragged Mark and me away as the paramedics arrived. That night they pulled the plug. Alicia was gone. And Mark and I blamed ourselves immediately, drowning in guilt that didn't belong to us. Our grandparents insisted it wasn't our fault, that it never should have been our responsibility, that we were children doing the job adults should have been doing. But my mother never blamed herself. Not once. CPS showed up. My dad filed for custody, believing she wasn't capable of caring for children, an argument that was painfully true. He won, temporarily. But our grandparents, believing we should stay with our mother, fought back, and somehow she won us back. Another mistake. Another tragedy waiting to happen. 4 years passed. I turned 18. Mark turned 15. He'd gotten into a fight, broken his finger, and had it held together with pins and screws. The pain medication he was given was strong enough to require careful supervision. Supervision my mother could not be trusted with. Supervision she completely ignored. One day my grandfather picked me up from school. His face was pale, deflated, almost hollow. I knew immediately something was wrong. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw paramedics rolling a stretcher out of the house. A stretcher with a body bag. Mark had overdosed. Alone. Unwatched. Unprotected. My brother. My friend. My other half. Gone because she didn't pay attention. Gone because she didn't care. Gone because she failed again. And that was the moment everything inside me finally snapped. That was the moment my revenge evolved into something cold, calculated, and unstoppable. That was the moment I realized my mother had taken everything from me. My childhood, my safety, my siblings, my sense of family, my hope. And if she was going to destroy everything I loved, then I was going to destroy what was left of her life. By the time my mother had 4 children, me, my little brother Mark, and later Sam and baby Alicia, you would think life in our home might have softened. Maybe you'd imagine a full table, warm meals, a house filled with the messy chaos of childhood and the gentle exhaustion of real parenting. You might picture a mother who eventually matured, who learned to love the children she brought into this world. But my reality was nothing close to that. When I turned 13, instead of stepping into the long-awaited better years, I walked straight into a deeper hell. My mother's third husband, my stepfather, decided that the best way to shape a child was to break him. He believed discipline meant violence, that questions were rebellion, that curiosity was disrespect. If I asked why something worked a certain way, if I had an opinion that didn't mirror his, if I so much as breathed with the slightest tone of independence, I paid for it. He'd hit me without hesitation, his temper snapping like a cracked whip, and I became the target he enjoyed striking the most. Sometimes the beatings came when my mother was standing just 5 feet away. She would look directly at me while he hit me. My mother, her face blank, her body still, her voice silent. Not a flinch, not a word, not even the instinctive protection that any mother should have for her own child. She didn't step between us. She didn't tell him to stop. She didn't even pretend to care. Her eyes slid past me as if watching someone stomp on a broken toy they never wanted in the first place. That was the moment, those moments, when something dark and powerful rooted itself deep inside me. A seed, small at first, a whisper, but with every bruise, every slap, every moment of humiliation it grew. It became a promise I didn't yet have the vocabulary to articulate. A vow I made in silence because a child doesn't always have the words, but they always have the pain. That was when the seed of revenge planted itself inside me, quietly burrowing deeper with each beating. But I was too young, too inexperienced, too mentally battered to do anything except survive. Survival became my only goal, so I waited. I clenched my teeth through the rage, swallowed the shame, and held the promise of justice somewhere in the back of my fractured mind, letting it harden with time. And while all of this was happening, the adults in the house, my mother and stepfather, refused to lift even a finger to maintain the home they let fall into chaos. Every weekend when my grandparents went out of town to visit family, the house became something like a military labor camp. Except the soldiers weren't grown men, they were children. Me, the oldest, always bore the worst of it. Dangerous chores became my normal life. Climbing onto the roof at 10 years old to clean out gutters stuffed with wet leaves and rotting debris. Crawling along shingles that shifted under my weight as if trying to throw me off. Holding pruning shears with unsteady hands as I climbed trees to trim branches that were far too thick and far too high for a child. It wasn't chores. It was exploitation. It was negligence. It was reckless endangerment disguised as responsibility. I was 10 years old doing the hard labor of a grown man. 10 years old with scraped knees, aching fingers, bruised ribs, and a hollow pit where a childhood should have been. And through all of it, my mother barely looked at me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask if I was scared. She didn't ask if the tools were too heavy or if I had eaten lunch that day. I could have fallen. I could have died. She wouldn't have noticed until the work wasn't done. And then everything broke. I was 14, just 14, old enough to feel responsible but young enough to still be a child. My mother told Mark and me to watch Alicia, our baby sister who was only 2 years old. Sam had just been born and my mother was exhausted and asleep with him. My stepfather was playing video games in the living room, fully available yet fully unwilling to lift his eyes from the screen. And we, 2 kids, were given the job of keeping a toddler safe. A toddler who had no fear, no understanding of danger, no awareness of what could kill her. 1 second she was in the living room, laughing, babbling, wandering. And the next she was gone. It happened so fast it felt impossible, like she vanished into thin air. 1 moment there was a warm little body climbing on the couch, and the next there was an empty spot where she'd been standing. Panic ripped through me instantly, sharp and suffocating. A 14-year-old's panic is different from an adult's. It's louder, messier, more frantic, because you don't understand what's at stake, only that something terrible is happening and you're suddenly responsible for everything. Mark and I tore through the house, yelling her name, running from room to room, searching every corner. My stepfather barely lifted his eyes, annoyed that our panic interrupted his game. My mother slept through the chaos, unaware that the worst moment of her life was already unfolding. Even my father, who had just arrived to visit, burned his hand on the stove when the screaming started and jumped into the search. And then it happened. A sound that still haunts me to this day. A sound that freezes me, even now, decades later. My mother's scream. A scream from outside, sharp, piercing, blood-curdling. It cut the air like a blade. The kind of scream that stops your heart before you even process what it means. Mark and I ran faster than we ever had in our lives, stumbling out the door and onto the deck. And there she was. Alicia, my baby sister, lying on the wooden boards beside the pool. Still, silent, not breathing. Her skin was pale, her lips were blue. Her tiny body unmoving as my mother and stepfather tried desperately to perform CPR, their hands trembling, their voices cracking. My father grabbed Mark and me and pulled us away, physically dragging us into the house, because he didn't want us to see what was happening, but we already had. That image was burned into us long before the ambulance arrived, long before strangers with uniforms and medical bags rushed through our door, long before we sat in a sterile hospital waiting room with our hearts in our throats, our hands shaking, our minds replaying every second we lost track of her. We waited. We prayed. We begged for a miracle from a God we weren't sure was listening. But that night, they pulled the plug. Alicia was gone. Mom's second catastrophic failure. Another life lost because she couldn't be bothered to be a mother, couldn't be bothered to stay awake, couldn't be bothered to check on her own child. The guilt crushed me and Mark. Two children carrying a weight that should have belonged to adults. We blamed ourselves even though we were never meant to carry that responsibility. Children aren't supposed to watch children. Children aren't supposed to prevent death. Children aren't supposed to be the last line of defense because the adults are too lazy, too exhausted, too selfish to step up. CPS got involved. My father, in his anger and heartbreak, filed for custody and won temporarily. It felt like justice, like maybe the universe was finally stepping in. But our grandparents, misguided in their loyalty and blinded by their belief that children belong with their mother, fought to send us back to her. And tragically, they succeeded. My brother's death did not feel real at first. It was as if the world had tilted just slightly off its axis, enough that nothing looked the same, nothing sounded the same, and I felt like an intruder in my own life. I remember standing in the doorway of our house, the cold draft of the open door brushing against my skin, while the paramedics lifted a black zipped bag onto a stretcher. A bag that was too long, too heavy, too still. A bag that held the only person who had ever shared every storm with me, every beating, every whispered hope in the dark. Mark, who used to laugh so hard he'd snort. Mark, who used to sneak into my room at night because the fights downstairs scared him. Mark, whose existence was the only reason I knew what love felt like inside those walls. I didn't cry at first. Shock is a strange thing. It freezes your body, your voice, your entire sense of reality. I think the human brain does that to protect you from exploding. But the moment my eyes caught the edge of that black bag, when I saw how it sagged under his weight, the weight of what used to be a boy with a future, something inside me cracked so violently that I swear I heard it. Not a physical sound, more like a soul-level fracture. A tearing, a ripping, a hollowing out. My mother stood in the driveway, her hands shaking, her eyes wide, but not with grief. No, her expression was something else. Panic, yes, but a kind of selfish panic. The kind that screams, what will people think of me? What will this mean for me? Not what have I done? What happened to my son? She wasn't crying, she didn't collapse. She wasn't screaming his name or begging the universe to bring him back. She just hovered, frozen. Like someone watching a tragedy from the outside, not the mother of the boy who lay lifeless on a stretcher. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt something other than fear or longing or confusion toward her. I felt hatred, pure, cold, hard hatred. Not because Mark was dead, no, death comes for everyone, but because she was alive. Because she had the audacity to still breathe air while the rest of us suffocated. Because she let it happen. Because she was the adult, the parent, the guardian, the one person in this world who was supposed to keep him safe. And she failed him the same way she failed every single child she ever brought into this world. Mark had been prescribed those pain pills because of a broken finger, something so small, so mundane, so stupidly survivable, a bruise on life. And yet she didn't watch him, she didn't count the pills, she didn't care enough to even ask how many he'd taken. She didn't monitor anything, she didn't even pretend. She just left him with a bottle of pills strong enough to kill a grown man and walked away. The kind of negligence that doesn't happen by accident, only by years of practice. I asked the paramedics, voice shaking, words barely forming, if there was anything they could do. They avoided eye contact. I knew what that meant. They'd seen this before. They knew when a body was too far gone, when the clock had already run out long before the sirens were called. Mark didn't die in the ambulance. He didn't die in a hospital. He died alone in his room, probably thinking the pain meds would help him sleep, probably thinking Mom would check on him the way mothers are supposed to. But she didn't. She never checked on her children unless she needed something. When the ambulance doors closed, the world fell silent, completely silent. No birds, no traffic, not even the wind, just me standing there like the last surviving character in a story that had spun wildly out of control. I looked down at my hands, shaking, useless, empty, and wondered if this was what destiny felt like. A cruel joke, a punchline delivered too late. Inside the house, everything was chaos. Sam was crying in the hallway, Sam who was now old enough to understand what death meant but too young to know how to carry it. I knelt beside him, pulled him into my chest, and held him so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. He kept asking the same question over and over. Is he coming back? Is Mark coming back? And every time he said it, my throat tightened until I could barely breathe. But I didn't answer him. I couldn't. There are some truths too heavy for a child to hear from the mouth of another child, pretending to be strong. CPS arrived not long after. They always come when a child dies under questionable circumstances. And trust me, everything about our house was questionable. They walked in with clipboards, with serious faces, with the kind of rehearsed sympathy that comes from seeing one too many broken families. They talked to my mother, who played the grieving parent so poorly that even strangers could see through her bitter theatrics. They talked to me, to Sam, to neighbors, to teachers. They asked questions I'd been waiting my whole life for someone in authority to ask. And then the hammer dropped. Sam was removed from the home. That was the first and only good decision CPS made for us. But even that victory was tainted because while they removed him from her, they didn't place him with us. Not with me, not with my dad, not with anyone who loved him. They put him in foster care, a world where kids disappear into the system like raindrops into an ocean. They promised we'd get updates. They promised he'd be okay. But promises mean nothing when they come from people who leave at sunset, while you stay behind in the ruins of a life you never asked for. After Sam was taken away, the house felt haunted, silent, empty. Everything smelled like antiseptic and grief. My mother cried that night, loud, dramatic sobs that echoed down the hallway, but they weren't for Mark. They weren't for Sam. They weren't for the children she kept losing. They were for her own image, her own guilt, her own fear of being exposed as the failure she'd always been. I sat outside in the dark, staring at the dirt beneath my feet, and tried to imagine a world where Mark was still alive. A world where Sam was still home. A world where our mother actually loved us. But that world didn't exist. It never had. And somewhere between one breath and the next, I made a choice that would define the rest of my life. I was done with her. Done trying. Done hopping. Done pretending the word mother meant anything in our house. I packed a bag with whatever I could carry and walked out without looking back. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much and it was killing me. I chose my dad's family, the family that had tried to save us, the family my grandparents had fought for, the family my mother resented because they were everything she wasn't: loving, stable, consistent, human. From that day on, I was no longer the oldest of three. I wasn't even a brother anymore. I was an only child with ghosts. Ghosts that walked beside me, slept in my dreams, followed me everywhere I went. Alicia gone because of negligence. Mark gone because of the same. Sam taken into a system he didn't deserve. And me, the last one standing, the one who carried all the stories, all the pain, all the unanswered questions. And my mother, she kept living, breathing, moving through the world like a storm that never dissipated. She went to work. She ate meals. She laughed with friends. She existed as if she hadn't buried 2 children and lost a third. That was the part I could never forgive. Not the mistakes, not the tragedies, not even the deaths. But the fact that she walked away from the wreckage she caused without even realizing she had set the fire. My grandfather, my hero, was still alive then, the last pillar of goodness I had left, the last living reminder that family could be something other than cruelty and regret. He was the only man who ever picked me up when I fell instead of shoving me down harder, the only adult who ever looked me in the eye and spoke gently, as though I was worth speaking gently to. I used to think he carried entire universes in his hands, because whenever he touched my shoulder or ruffled my hair, the chaos of the world quieted for just a moment. And my mother, my own biological mother, took advantage of him like he was a bank account without a PIN code. She preyed on his kindness with the precision of a seasoned thief, never enough to be obvious, but always enough to drain. She'd ask him for money, for favors, for rides, for support. And every time he said yes, she came back wanting more. She treated him like a faucet that never stopped running, like a safety net that could never tear. He never confronted her. He was too gentle, too hopeful, too loyal to blood. But I watched. Oh, I watched everything. And the resentment inside me grew roots so deep that they wrapped around my bones. I saw every manipulation, every crocodile tear, every lie she spun, every guilt trip she packaged with a shaky voice and a forced tremble in her lip. And because I loved my grandfather more than anyone left in this world, I decided that if she wanted to prey on him, she'd have to go through me first. I challenged her openly, not like a rebellious teenager trying to establish dominance, no. I challenged her like an enemy who had waited years for the war to begin. Every request she made to him, I intercepted. If she wanted money, I made sure he knew she was lying about the reason. If she wanted him to babysit her kids, I'd step in and offer instead, so she'd have to find an excuse to decline. If she tried to guilt-trip him, I'd call her out in front of him, stripping her manipulations down to their naked core. And every time I exposed her, every time I held a mirror up to her ugliness, she broke a little. Her voice would rise, her face would redden, her composure would crack. She'd scream that I didn't understand her. She'd scream that I was disrespectful. She'd scream that everything she did was for us. The lies melted like ice under a blowtorch. There were nights she stormed out of my grandparents' house in tears, loud, dramatic tears designed to make everyone pity her. But no one did, because by then, everyone knew who she really was. Everyone except her. Narcissists rarely recognize their own reflection. But I wanted more. I wanted her to snap. I wanted her to hit me once, just once, so I could unleash everything I'd bottled up for years. Every bruise, every insult, every moment of neglect. I wanted her to give me permission through violence. I wanted to break her the way she broke all of us. But she never did. She stayed just quiet enough, just restrained enough, just cowardly enough to avoid crossing that line. Not because she loved me. No, my mother never loved any of us. She didn't hit me because deep down she knew I wanted it. She knew it would give me a weapon she couldn't take back. So I waited. I watched. I studied her weaknesses like a biologist studying a venomous snake behind glass. And then, one day, the universe delivered justice with a beautifully wrapped ribbon. She slipped at work, one careless step, one unlucky angle, and shattered her back in a way that left doctors frowning and shaking their heads. When the news reached me, I did not feel concern. I did not feel fear. I did not feel even the faintest twinge of sympathy. I smiled. That smile was not small. It was not subtle. It cracked across my face like lightning. Because for the first time in my life, the pain wasn't mine. It was hers. And she couldn't blame this one on anyone else. She couldn't yell her way out of it or guilt-trip it into someone else's lap. This suffering belonged to her and her alone. While she was recovering, crying about how much it hurt, whining about how unfair life was, begging everyone for help, I quietly made sure the world stayed as dark for her as she had made it for us. I stole her medication, not enough to kill her. I wasn't trying to end her life. No, death would have been too merciful. I wanted her to live in agony. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the pain she had inflicted on her children, her parents, the world around her. So I hid the pills in places she'd never think to look. I flushed some. I buried others in the backyard. I tossed a few into storm drains just for the satisfaction of watching them disappear forever. Every time she groaned in agony, every time she cursed the pain, every time she sobbed into her pillow, begging for relief, I felt a warmth inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Not joy, no. Revenge has its own flavor, darker and more intoxicating than joy. A slow burn that spreads from the chest outward until it fills every inch of your being. She deserved every ounce of it. And as karma often does, it didn't stop with pain. She started taking double doses of the meds she had left, chasing numbness like it was the only thing holding her together. And one night she climbed behind the wheel, high as the stars, pupils blown wide, confidence sky high, and drove straight into a DUI arrest that ended with flashing lights, handcuffs, and a record she'd spend the rest of her life trying to hide. 6 months in jail. 6 months of cold floors, stale food, and the kind of loneliness she had forced onto all of us for years. And I laughed. I laughed until my stomach hurt. I laughed until my grandfather looked at me with a mixture of worry and recognition. I laughed because for the first time in my life, she didn't get away with it. She didn't slip through the cracks. She didn't charm her way out. She didn't stand over anyone else and watch them suffer. No, this time, she was the one being dragged away. Her suffering was my justice. And for a moment, just a moment, the scales finally felt balanced. While she was locked up behind bars, stripped of control, stripped of excuses, stripped of the ability to command or manipulate or guilt trip, I quietly laid the foundation for the next phase of my revenge. A phase that wasn't loud or violent or dramatic, but slow, suffocating, and designed to remind her every single day that the power she once wielded over me was dead. The moment the cell door clanged shut behind her, a door opened for me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the powerless child she used to shove aside like I was clutter. I wasn't the punching bag her husband used for stress relief, or the scapegoat she blamed for everything that went wrong in her life. I was free, and she, for once, was trapped. My grandparents, bless their tired hearts, didn't really understand the depth of the war I was fighting. They saw a broken mother in jail paying the price for her mistakes. They didn't see the battlefield behind my eyes, the blood, the memories, the nights spent wide awake listening for footsteps so I could brace myself for the next beating. They didn't know that the guilt I carried for the deaths of my siblings lived in me like a parasite, chewing away at whatever innocence I had left. They didn't understand that to me, revenge wasn't petty, it wasn't childish, it wasn't optional, it was oxygen. So while she spent her nights curled on a cheap mattress in a cold jail cell, telling herself she didn't deserve to be there, I walked into her room, the one she'd claimed for years as her sanctuary, and I took it. Not quietly, not timidly, not like a boy borrowing space until she returned. I claimed it like land won through bloodshed. I stripped the walls bare, removing every trace of her existence. I emptied the closet and boxed up her belongings with the same emotional detachment someone uses when packing donations for a thrift store. I shoved every photo, every trinket, every piece of her life into storage. And then once the room was empty, I rebuilt it the way I wanted. My bed, my shelves, my desk, my blankets, my things, my air. For the first time ever, the best space in the house belonged to the person who had earned it, not the one who had demanded it. And as I stood in the middle of that room, fresh sheets on the bed, sunlight pouring through the window, the walls no longer choking with her presence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not happiness, not joy, not triumph, just peace. And peace for someone like me was sacred. When she finally got out of jail months later, thinner, older, angrier, tired in a way that wasn't physical, she walked into the house expecting the world to snap back into place just because she was home. She expected her old life, her old comfort, her old room, her old control. Instead, she saw me walking out of what used to be her bedroom. And she stopped. For a moment, she looked like a ghost seeing the house she used to haunt. Her eyes traveled from my bed to my bookshelf to my posters to the new curtains I hung, to the clean floor she used to complain about but never cleaned herself. She didn't say anything. Her face tightened, her jaw clenched, her hands balled into fists at her sides. And then she asked, in a small voice that was equal parts disbelief and entitlement, "Where am I supposed to sleep?" I didn't answer with words. I just stepped aside and looked toward the living room, toward the old, metal bar couch she had ignored my entire childhood. My grandmother tried to soften the blow. "Just for a little while," she said. "You can sleep here until we rearrange things." But I made sure rearranging never happened. And so she slept there, on that cold, sagging couch with the iron bars pressing into her already damaged spine. She'd settle on her side and shift and groan, struggling to find a position that didn't send lightning bolts of pain up her back. Every movement was agony. Every night was torture. And I savored it. In the morning, when she tried to stand, she'd grip the armrest like it was the edge of a cliff. Her face would twist, teeth grinding, breath shaking as she tried to pull herself upright. My grandmother would wince, my grandfather would sigh. And I would sit at the kitchen table sipping coffee, watching her struggle like someone watching a show they'd waited years for. Because for the first time in her life, she didn't get comfort just because she demanded it. She didn't get relief just because she cried. She didn't get sympathy just because she played the victim. For the first time, she was living the life she built for me. A life of discomfort. A life of pain. A life where the smallest movement hurt. And every night, when I lay down in the bed she once slept in while I suffered elsewhere, I stretched out comfortably and let my body sink into the mattress. I pulled the blankets over myself and felt heat, softness, safety. While she curled into herself on cold metal, wincing every time she breathed too deeply. That was the beauty of the second revenge. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. It was slow. It was quiet. It was daily. And it was inescapable. Every morning reminded her she was lesser. Every night reminded her she wasn't wanted. Every ache in her back reminded her she had no power left. And I cherished every second. Because finally, the universe was letting her feel exactly what she made me feel growing up. Uncomfortable, unwanted, unimportant, and utterly painfully alone. Years passed, and with every passing season I watched my mother decay into a weaker, more desperate version of herself. A woman who used to walk with arrogant confidence now reduced to a constant wince, a tightened jaw, and a limp she tried, and always failed, to hide, as if pretending could rewrite the truth that she had built her own suffering with her own hands. We moved houses during that time, not because we wanted to, but because life forced us out, because circumstances and finances and strained relationships cornered us, until we packed our lives into boxes and hauled them into a place that smelled like damp wood and old regrets, a place that always felt colder than it should have been, as though the walls themselves refused to hold warmth. Her back had gotten worse by then, much worse, and she weaponized that pain the way she weaponized everything that ever happened to her. She started leaning on my grandparents more and more, weaving these pitiful, manipulative stories about how the doctors weren't helping, about how no one believed her pain, about how she just needed a little something stronger to get through the bad days. And my grandparents, with hearts too soft and too loyal for their own good, fell for it exactly the way she wanted them to. I watched her slither from one lie to another, watched her practice her limp when they were around and straighten up almost fully when she thought no one was looking, watched her nudge them emotionally, guilt them, scare them, twist their love into a tool she could use to get what she wanted, illegal pain pills that were stronger, quicker, and easier to hide from doctors. I warned them. God, I warned them. I begged my grandparents not to fall into her trap, pleaded with the kind of desperation that made my voice crack, telling them they were enabling her, that they were feeding something dark and growing inside her, that they were hurting her more than helping her. But the more I tried to pull them away from her manipulative orbit, the tighter she wrapped herself around them, playing the role of the misunderstood daughter, the wounded victim, the one person in the family who deserved sympathy above all else. I fought with them. I raised my voice. I argued until my throat felt raw and my hands shook. But they kept choosing her, again and again, blinded by a nostalgia I never had, remembering a version of her that no longer existed, or maybe one that never existed at all. Eventually, I realized that if no one else was going to stop her, I would have to do it myself. So I did what she always feared I was capable of. I took action. I filed an anonymous report to the police, detailing the pills she was buying under the table, the shady people she was meeting behind convenience stores and gas stations, the way she pressured my grandparents into funding her addiction. I wrote everything in a tone so detached, so clinical, that it felt less like reporting my mother and more like documenting a specimen under a microscope. For days after I submitted the report, I lived in a strange state of anticipation, a mixture of hope and dark excitement, imagining officers walking up to her, imagining the panic on her face when they questioned her, imagining the collapse of the little web of manipulation she had spun so carefully. But nothing happened. Nothing. No knock on the door. No charges. No consequences. The world moved on as though I had never spoken at all. And while part of me was frustrated, maybe even angry that the attempt had fallen flat, another part of me felt strangely satisfied just knowing that I had tried, that I had at least attempted to drag her into the justice she had outrun for far too long. Even a failed strike still felt like a strike. But I didn't stop there, because why would I? Her suffering had become my quiet mission. The one thing in my life that felt like balance being restored, the only justice the universe seemed unwilling to give me unless I took it myself. So I continued hiding her medications, just as I had done since those early days, slipping pills out of bottles, moving them to places she would never look, tossing some out entirely, creating gaps and shortages that left her packing the hallway at night whispering curses under her breath, clutching her spine as though her bones were grinding together. I watched her grow more irritable with every missing dose, watched her lash out at shadows, watched her try to figure out where the pills were disappearing to, watched her blame everyone except herself. And each time she grimaced from a pain she thought was fate but was actually my doing, I felt a quiet, private satisfaction curl through me like smoke from a fire no one else could see, because she deserved every second of it, every grimace, every gasp, every sleepless night. Every reminder from our own body that cruelty comes back for those who create it. And I made sure it did, for her, for me, for all the years she spent breaking people and calling it motherhood. If you have siblings, if you have even one person who shares the same childhood air, the same roof, the same chaotic early memories that shape a human being before they even know what shaping means, then I am begging you, truly begging you with every trembling fragment of the boy I once was and the man I became, to hold on to them with a tenderness so fierce it borders on sacred, because siblings are not just people, they are living echoes of your earliest self, mirrors of who you used to be. Reminders of a time when the world had not yet carved its disappointments into your skin. Hug them until your arms shake, until your breath catches, until they pull away laughing, because the truth I learned too late, the truth that gouged itself into me like a wound that never heals, is that time is a thief with a patient hand, a thief that doesn't announce its arrival, a thief that steals slowly and silently until one day you wake up and realize the people you assumed would always be there have been taken, not by choice, not by distance, but by the brutal, irreversible finality of loss. Cherish them in ways you don't have words for yet. Cherish the tiny moments that seem insignificant, the shared jokes, the petty arguments, the quiet late-night conversations that drift nowhere and everywhere at once. Because those small moments become the ones your brain replays like broken film reels when the people you love are no longer here to create new ones with you. Protect them with a loyalty that burns hotter than anger, with a devotion that rises instinctively the way hunger or fear does, because siblings are the companions assigned to you before you know what companionship even means, the ones who grow up inside the same storms, who learn the same unspoken rules, who endure the same cold silences or loud fights or moments of joy or flashes of hope. And if you are fortunate, so fortunate, they become the people who understand you without explanation, who know how you break, how you mend, where you hide your pain, and what kind of love you crave but never ask for. I lost the two people I loved most in the world, the only two who truly shared the battlefield of our childhood with me, the only two who could look at me and know, instantly, what I was feeling even before I could find the language for it. And I didn't lose them gently. There was no soft fade, no peaceful passing, no closure wrapped in comforting words. I lost them hard, fast, violently, in ways that shattered the timeline of my life and split it into two halves: the brief, fragile before where we were together, and the endless, echoing after where I walk alone through the ruins of what could have been. I lost the chance to be the older brother they deserved, the protector they needed, the shield I should have been, because life didn't give me the tools to save them and my mother didn't give me the safety to keep them close. Instead, I was a boy trying to survive while also trying to keep two younger souls from being crushed under the same weight that was suffocating me. And the worst part, the part that gnaws at me in the dark hours when everything is quiet, is knowing that we could have escaped together, could have grown up into adults who look back and said, "We made it. We survived despite everything." But that future was stolen from us before we could even start building it. Every night, no matter how many years stacked between me and the past, no matter how many adult responsibilities or distractions pile on top of my chest, I still cry silently for the children we were, for the versions of us who deserved better, for the laughter that should have filled birthdays and holidays and milestones we never got to see. My revenge, every cold, calculated act, every piece of sabotage, every hidden pill, every report, every whispered decision I made in the shadowed corridors of my own grief, was not born from hatred for the sake of hatred, nor from cruelty for the satisfaction of cruelty. It was born from love, from an aching, grief-soaked love that had nowhere healthy to go, from a loss so deep it hollowed out parts of me I will never retrieve, from the unbearable truth that the person who should have protected us destroyed us instead. And even though revenge does not heal, even though vengeance does not resurrect the dead or soothe the wounded teenager still buried inside me, it was the only weapon I had against a world that took everything from me. But you, whoever you are, reading these words, breathing in this moment, standing at a crossroads you might not even recognize, don't let your story become a reflection of mine. Don't wait until a coffin closes or a machine flatlines or a body bag zips up to realize the value of the people you love. Don't spend your whole life assuming that later is guaranteed, that apologies can be postponed, that love can be shown eventually, that forgiveness can wait for a better day. Hug your siblings. Cherish them. Protect them. Fight for them. Show up for them, because you never know when the world will take them away, and once it does, no amount of revenge, no amount of anger, no amount of tears will ever bring them back. And I would give anything, to go back to even one ordinary day with them, just one moment where all three of us were alive in the same room, unaware of the storms that waited ahead. So please, for your sake and for theirs, love them while they're here. Never forget that the world does not warn you before it steals what you treasure most.